15,000 years ago, humans lived in the wilderness, whether they wanted to or not. 15 decades ago, humans began to understand the need for wilderness as the American frontier began to vanish. And 15 minutes from now, if we do this right, you'll see your place in the wilderness at Congaree National Park. The Congaree National Park Wilderness in South Carolina protects more than 21,000 acres of eastern bottomland forest, one of just 10 wilderness areas in national parks east of the Mississippi. But what does that actually mean? It means that the National Park Service has promised to protect a place for you only 20 minutes from the greater Columbia area. Call it a gift or an investment in your future. It's yours, and we invite you to come be a part of it, to take its memories back home when you leave, and maybe to see the nature beyond the boundary of the wilderness.
Well, Congaree is unique in two respects. One, it's that old-growth forest. The forest has been minimally manipulated by people, and so that if you come here and you get out into the wilderness, into the old-growth part of the park, you're experiencing this ecosystem as it may have existed 100, 200, maybe 300 years ago. It has been affected by people. It's not completely unaffected by human activities. There was some farming here, there was some logging here, but the signs of those activities has largely disappeared, and the big trees still remain, so that when you're out in this wilderness, you are experiencing something really rare that exists nowhere else in our nation.
Henry David Thoreau said, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." He wasn't talking about protecting places without people. He was telling us that wilderness may be the window to understanding our own place in the world. And who doesn't want that? It's important to begin with an understanding of what wilderness is and isn't. Wilderness doesn't have to be remote or hostile, and getting there doesn't have to be a struggle. In fact, it may be at its best when it feels like home. Wilderness is just a legal term to describe large areas of land where the impacts of people are small and temporary. Technically, areas designated as wilderness must be at least 5,000 acres of federally managed land, or less if the land has the right balance of unique resources and opportunities. And to be legally recognized as wilderness, it has to be approved by Congress. Wilderness status, though, creates a special level of protection for the land. Even in the national parks, where preservation is the focus, wilderness is managed more carefully to minimize the human impact.
It's a product of democracy. People come to their legislators and representatives and say, we think this area should be designated as wilderness. Congress looks at that proposal and they try to judge how much support there is for a particular wilderness proposal. And if there's a lot of support for it, and Congress feels that the area has been sufficiently studied, they will enact a wilderness bill that puts a line on the map, and that's your wilderness area. But wherever they come in, whether they're small and somewhat highly degraded or large and largely pristine, we take them at that point and then we try to enhance their character going forward. And that's really our mission.
It's a balance, though. We can all agree that cars on a paved road don't qualify as wilderness. But what about bikes on a trail? Does a trail created by people suddenly mean that the wilderness isn't natural? What if the trail is a boardwalk and not just a footpath? In designated wilderness, the rules are simple and common sense, and they apply to everyone, even the National Park Service. There are no campfires and no mechanized travel or power tools. There are no chainsaws or bicycles or leaf blowers or ATVs. It's all about maintaining a balance between the protection of the wilderness character and its use by visitors.
The ultimate ethos of wilderness is restraint. The framers of the Wilderness Act felt that it was extremely important for people to recognize that their prior attempts to manipulate and control the wilderness often caused harm, even when they were trying to do good. A great example of that is when we killed off all the predators in Yellowstone National Park or in some of the western areas. The people that drafted the Wilderness Act had seen that sort of thing and realized that humans don't have all the answers when it comes to dealing with nature, and that there ought to be some places where nature is allowed to teach us, if you will, where we can see how these natural processes work, and that we resist the temptation to come in and manipulate, control, and improve, and in these areas at least, just let it be.
When we talk about wilderness, we can get deep into those weeds. That's why there are criteria to help guide us about what deserves to be designated wilderness and what doesn't.
When the Park Service studies lands for possible wilderness designation, we look to see whether the land meets these elements of wilderness character. Is it an area that's at least 5,000 acres in size? Is it untrammeled? That is it essentially unmanipulated? Is it natural? Is the imprint of human activity substantially unnoticeable? Is it undeveloped? Are there any permanent structures there? Anything that would degrade from this feeling of wildness? There's a bottomland hardwood forest that has no roads, it has no structures, it functions as naturally as just about any area that you can imagine on the East Coast can function. The East has been heavily modified. It's not it's nearly as pristine as many of the areas that we know of out west and think of as wilderness. But within an eastern context, Congaree has not only the old-growth forest, about 10,000 acres of old-growth forest, which has been minimally affected by humans, but it also has a hydrological system, the way the water flows and functions in the park, that has been affected less than many other areas in the southeast in particular, so that it has the natural character that we look for in wilderness. It also has what we call the untrammeled character. That's a fancy word that's in the Wilderness Act itself, which means it's unmanipulated, it's unhindered, it's allowed to do its own thing. And so the area functions naturally, it's unmanipulated, it has no development, virtually any, and it's just got the wild and primitive feel of an area that's been just minimally affected by people.
That's the goal, preserving the overall wilderness character. Visitors can come and go, they can camp or fish, or birdwatch or canoe, or just get outside. But each visitor experiences a land that hasn't been changed substantially by human development. And note the word substantially. That lovely word gives us the breathing space to make humans a part of the wilderness. The official definition of wilderness says that the area generally appears to have been affected primarily by the forces of nature, with the imprint of humans' work substantially unnoticeable. Okay, so we got down into the weeds, and now maybe it's time to climb back out. Just remember this: wilderness doesn't mean no humans. Wilderness is about the character of a place that people can experience. Wilderness has other values too. It protects species and habitats. It provides places for quiet recreation and personal reflection. It can be a part of local economies based on tourism. But its main reason for existing is to provide a window. It gives us a place to go where, instead of looking out our window at the world, we simply look at the world. Which brings us back to Congaree National Park. The Congaree Wilderness has been used by people for logging and cattle and fishing and camping, but the impact was so small and the natural integrity of the old-growth bottomland forest is so very high that it has been given protected status.
There's no way you cannot experience the wilderness when you come to Congaree, because the wilderness starts almost literally the minute you step out of the visitor center and walk towards the floodplain, or the area behind where we're looking now. Most people experience the wilderness via the boardwalk. You walk out on the boardwalk. We have, is it two and a half miles of elevated boardwalk that takes you through a wetland area. It's very typical of the park as a whole, and yet it's very easy to travel. If you've got a wheelchair, you can get around the wilderness in your wheelchair. But it gives you an experience very much like what somebody who likes to go further out would experience. It's not entirely the same, but it's very close. And again, just by walking out of the visitor center and crossing over the line, that's something that's quite unusual about Congaree, is that you don't have to walk a great distance in the front country to get to the back country. In fact, one of our management issues at this park is we have no front country. You walk out of the visitor center and you're in the wilderness.
Just a few steps down the boardwalk from the visitor center will put you inside the wilderness. For more, take a step off the boardwalk, across the bridge at Cedar Creek, and move into undeveloped areas where the natural process of wind and water and gravity and sunshine are given their rightful place. And understand that you belong in this wilderness too. And when you leave, understand that you're not leaving nature behind. Nature is big, and it can't be contained or protected in just 21,000 acres. The champion tree in the wilderness shares the same world as the tree in your yard, your world. The Congaree Wilderness is a place for you to see that for yourself.
What I like about wilderness, what I love about wilderness, is not the philosophical stuff. A lot of the things that prompted people to pass the Wilderness Act, I respect. It's not really my thing. What the wilderness is to me is a knowledge that it's not going to change at the hands of humans. Every place changes. This forest is not going to stay the same. It's not the same now as it was 200 years ago or 400 years ago. It's not going to be the same 100 years from now with climate change and other things that are going on. But because it is designated wilderness, it's been designated as wilderness by Congress, I know as much as anyone can know that this land is not going to change. And to me, that's just a great comfort. And knowing also that it's going to be preserved with minimal manipulation. I know also that the creatures that need this kind of forest are going to have a place that they can migrate through or live in for as long as I'm going to be around, certainly, and for those of us, all the visitors that come here, for as long as this is a park. So to me, that's what the real significance of the place is that it's going to stay as it is.